So let's start at the end, and we'll work our way backwards from there. So you are currently famous, or most famous, for a service called Store Play, which you launched out of your business Marketing Melodies 5 years ago. So let's quickly get everybody caught up on what exactly Store Play is.
So Store Play and Marketing Melodies essentially supply retail technology to retailers, food and hospitality businesses. And essentially Store Play, which we launched in 2012, is an app. It was the first of its kind. And yeah, retailers, they download the app on a mobile device and then they subscribe to playlists. It's essentially like Spotify for business.
All right, awesome. And so let's not be too modest here. So it's just this little app that we just sort of made, and it's like Spotify for business. So how many, let's say, retail and hospitality venues could I walk into today and hear music playing from your app?
We're currently in about 4,500 retail stores. So some of our clients include, we just won Optus, we do Grilled, we do the Just Group, which is Just Jeans, JJ's, Portman's, Jackie E, Sass & Bide, Cook-Eye, Karen Millen, Mimco.
Good to see you supporting all of those guys.
Yeah.
That's a Cook-Eye outfit, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to be.
So this is a weird thing, right? So this is like one of those parts of an industry. It's a business that you would never really realise existed. You walk into a store, you hear music on, you don't really think that there's some whole engine happening behind it. How on earth do you get into doing something like this?
So back in 1989, I was doing my final year of marketing, and I had already been DJing at that stage for a little bit.
Wait, that's you DJing, right?
That's me back in the day, yeah, on the decks. And I essentially combined the two of them for my final year strategic assignment. We had to put a business plan together, and so essentially out of that, I came up with the idea of Marketing Melodies. And we essentially had to pitch it to a retailer, and so I pitched it to Portman's at the time, and I got a credit for this thing. I didn't do overly well in it, to be honest. But post the actual presentation, they actually came up to me and said, you know, we really love this idea. Do you want to roll with it? So I literally rolled straight out of my marketing degree with my first client. You know, this is the mid-'80s, so at that stage I was actually just mixing cassettes on record in my bedroom. You know, my differentiator was that we were actually customising programs. There were a couple other companies that were doing stuff, and they made 4 cassettes. There was easy listening, pop, and rock, and instrumental, and every retailer got whichever one they chose. So Portman's was playing the same as Sports Girl. So our differentiator was that we were actually customising those programs, and I had to mix those in real time in my bedroom.
Okay, so let's get this right. So you're literally still at university. You've just done an assignment. Out of the assignment, you've picked up your first contract for a completely legitimate business. Do you remember how many stores Portman's had?
I think they had 65.
65 stores. So, actually, what happened? What did you do?
Look, it was important for me, being a DJ and sort of with the love for music, that it was legal. So I went about getting the licensing. So, you know, to do what I do, you need I needed to get 2 licenses. One was with ARIA, which is the Record Industry Association, and they represent the artists and the record labels. And then there's another sister business or another company which is called AMCOS, and they represent the writers and the publishers, because often the writer isn't the artist. And so I went about getting those licenses. And what makes our business quite different is we don't actually sell programs, we actually lease them. So therefore that allows us to use any music that we want on these programs without actually having to clear it, and we just pay royalties post-production.
Cool, so the retailers don't have to worry about any of the legal or licensing side of things, they just pay you guys. But Portman's would give you a contract, and then you are going and making a cassette every...
We were making a 90-minute cassette every month, so they'd have one cassette that they'd listen to for 30 days, and then they'd get another one. So if their cassette didn't break, which often they did, and then they'd have to go back to the month prior. So there was a frenzy when these cassettes came out, and I'd literally be in my bedroom, I'd mix a cassette, I'd have to send it off to the retailer, they'd send it back to me with any feedback. And being a cassette, having 2 sides, 45 minutes each, I literally had to sit there and measure out the amount of time, because if you had a 3-minute gap at the end of one side of a cassette, there'd be 3 minutes of silence in the store. So they'd come back with feedback and then I'd have to reshuffle. It was very labour intensive. And, at the time I knew I couldn't really scale the business, and thankfully technology has allowed me to evolve it.
So you talk about scaling. You mentioned at the start 4,500 stores on now, and those first 65 were from Portmans. How was the growth sort of over the years?
Well, due to that intensity of having to do CDs in the manner I had to do them, it couldn't scale. I ended up probably with about 300 or 400 stores, but it was just too hard to be able to scale it. So that was probably the first, 10 years, I suppose. But I was DJing at the time. I was only 25, so I was like living the life. Most of my friends were still studying. The advent of technology meant CDs, which meant, thank God, there were no longer 2 sides that I had to do. So then it was just one 80-minute CD. You could burn quicker, you could burn at 24 speed. It just sped up the process, and that allowed us probably up to about 2012 to probably get up to about 1,000 stores. And then, the digital age was just like bang, that just went crazy. We could download music, we could upload music, and it was just so much easier to do.
Cool. So you talked a little about licensing before, and I think this is a good chance for us to sort of get into the meat of this stuff. So I think one of the mysteries for me, and I imagine a lot of people here, is like, do artists actually make money these days? Like, do people, the people that make this music that we all just stream and we pay $10 a month, are artists actually making money these days? And if so, like, where is the money coming from?
Yeah, look, artists are making money, but they're making money in a very different manner to what they used to in the 90s. The advent of technology and downloading and Napster in the 90s. Just you look at the value, it's sort of dropped by about 70% there. In between 1999 and 2000. And so, I think what's happened is that music essentially has just become a bit of an intro into the world of the creative, and then how an artist actually makes their money is through a portfolio of music, touring, endorsements, syncing, which is getting a track added to a TV commercial or something of the like. And they really need to sort of have a far broader business model to make their music. The the global music market in the mid 90s was $60 billion. That's just from music sales, and these days it's dropped down to 15 billion. So there's a 75% drop there in actually the amount of music that artists are making through the sale of music.
That's a big drop.
It's a big drop.
If we go back maybe to those heydays 20 years ago, like if you were a number one single guy back then, like you did one, you think about these like one-hit wonders you hear from back in the 70s or 80s or 90s, and I wonder, like, did the guy who wrote that, is he on a yacht, or is he like cleaning somebody else's yacht somewhere on a reality TV show? Like, was there a time when you could just make money doing music?
Yeah, look, I still think you can make money just doing music, but back in the day it was probably that the way the process worked was probably a lot easier, and if you probably had some good fiscal management, you might be able to at least have some friends that have a yacht. You mightn't have to work on the yacht, but it's always been difficult for artists. It's just become a lot harder.
Right. And so today, I mean, how much are artists making these days?
So your mega artists, if you're having a top 5 album and you're Adele's of the world and things like that, they're, especially when they're touring, a touring artist, 60% of an artist's revenue is made up of touring. So their revenue is made up from touring. So, an artist like that would probably be, if she's not touring, she might be making 14 million, 15 million a year, and maybe up to 200 million a year if she is on tour. And then if you've just got an artist that's sort of breaking into the market, they might be anything from a couple hundred to $1 million a year, which is sort of around the same as like a mid-level YouTube star, to be honest.
So you talk about guys breaking in, so that might be somebody with their first couple of songs getting radio
couple of songs
play.
that are getting, radio play. That touring thing that I've spoken on is really different to what it used to be in the, back in the day with records, and in the 90s and earlier. The record label owned that relationship. So what they would do is they would record an album. They'd take it to the record company. The record company actually, in some regard, would actually reject it and say, we don't like that album, come back with something else. So the creative process was very much controlled by the record label, and the record label then actually would send them out to do media, then they'd go on tour, and then that cycle would just continue for the next album. And that conversation happens between the artists and their fans directly, and that's really changed and given the artists a lot more power.
So I guess, that's a thing we're starting to see across all industries, where you've got manufacturers going direct to their consumers, and things like social media obviously playing a big role in that. What sort of an impact has that had on the music world?
Oh, look, it's been an incredible impact. I think you look at the social media following that some of these artists have. There's artists, these are, I think we put these down, these are the top 5 in the world. Just the power of those numbers, 120 million, Instagram followers. It's incredible, and they can move them in any way that they want through just telling them that they're going to be either appearing here, going on tour here, and they've been able to cut out the middleman. Taylor Swift is quite famous for it, in the fact that she didn't let her album go onto Spotify because she didn't want it to be given away for free, because of the freemium portion of that platform. So she just said no way, and so what she did, I don't think it's actually still available on Spotify. So she knew that she would make far more money from music downloads on iTunes and things of the like, and she only added it to paid platforms. So they've got that power now, and she can send people to iTunes and say, I don't want you going there, I want you going here, or I'm touring, and she just, they follow her wherever she goes.
And what's the impact of that for up-and-coming artists, and maybe even some Australian up-and-coming artists?
Look, I think they have much the same power. You look at an artist like Flume, you look at a Chet Faker, who are probably at the top of their game. These guys, an artist in Australia, you can record a track that night, you can upload it to Triple J Unearthed if it's the way you want to go. If you don't have a deal, it gets heard by a couple of people, you get a little bit of a groundswell, all of a sudden it's on Triple J, then it can sort of shoot you into the hottest 100. And it's happened. There's artists like Art versus Science, like 5 or 6 years ago. Those guys made an absolute killing, and they were releasing all their music independently. And the festival tours that are happening globally now, if you get on those tours, they're just like a gravy train, because they essentially it's just following an endless summer, and you sort of get on even a side stage at a Lollapalooza or a Coachella. You'll be paid 20 to 100 grand to be on that, and you can probably go through 10, 15, 20 of those festivals in a year, because they're all going to different destinations, and there's $500,000 there just from that. So being able to perform and have a great live show and connect with your audience is really a key part of what an artist needs to be doing these days.
So you can't just do an album, go on holidays for a year.
Doesn't work like that.
Maybe just before I open it up to 1 or 2 questions from the audience, so you talk about following this sort of festival tour around and what guys can do off that. What would be sort of the dizzy heights of getting paid to perform? Like who out there would you say is doing the least amount of work for the most amount of return? In
all honesty, it's the DJs are the new rock stars. You look at someone like a Calvin Harris, who these days has a...
This guy? Is that Calvin Harris?
No, I wish. Calvin Harris has got a residency at Hakkasan in Vegas. He plays there every month and gets $500,000 per gig.
How long's a gig?
2 hours.
Which is how long I've been working for this morning.
He rocks up. He doesn't have to cart records around like I used to in the past. I used to pile 5 crates of records into the boot.
That's how you got those guns. Come on, mate.
In the back of my car. You rock up now with a USB stick, you know, and your headphones. Literally, that's all you need. And this guy is getting paid, you know, phenomenal. And that's outside of what he earns by then headlining a festival where he'd probably get $2 to $3 million if he was headlining a stage. Probably, and that's probably only for a 45-minute to 1 hour set.
So a lot of USB sticks. Awesome. All right. Well, Dean's going to hang around for a little bit this morning as well. Please thank Dean for coming and joining us this morning.